My husband took the whole family out to celebrate his promotion, except me. Before leaving, he stood in the doorway adjusting his tie and said, "Don't forget to finish the leftovers in the fridge." I met his eyes for a brief second, the same eyes I had looked into for 27 years, and simply replied, "Okay." Then I quietly packed my bags, wrote the letter, and left it on the kitchen table. The next morning when they came home and saw what was inside their comfortable world, cracked open. My name is Linda Thompson. I'm 52 years old. For the past 6 years, I had become little more than a live-in housekeeper in the home I helped build and paid for with my own retirement savings. But that Thursday evening in early October, something finally broke. Richard burst through the front door with the kind of energized stride he used to have when we were younger. Jessica trailed behind him, scrolling through her phone, already planning the victory post for her social media. The scent of his cologne, something new and expensive, filled the kitchen where I was wiping down the counters after preparing dinner for the family. "Honey, they gave it to me," he announced, loosening his tie with a satisfied grin. "Regional director. Big salary bump, stock options, the whole package." A flicker of genuine pride warmed my chest. Despite the growing distance between us, I still wanted good things for him. I set the dish towel aside and stepped forward. "Richard, that's fantastic. I'm really proud of you." Before I could suggest we celebrate together, Jessica clicked across the hardwood floor in her heels. "We're going to the Capitol Grill tonight. The kids are meeting us there and my parents are driving in from Columbus. It's going to be perfect." I waited for Richard to say something. He didn't. Instead, he checked his watch. Jessica offered me that practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "This one's really more for the immediate team and family who've been part of the journey at work, Linda. You understand?" The words landed with quiet precision. I was his wife. I had supported his career through every late night, every layoff scare, every relocation. I had raised our children while he traveled. Yet here I stood, edited out of his biggest professional moment. Richard was already calling Michael. "Yeah, buddy, your old man finally made it. See you at 8. He glanced back at me. "There's leftover pot roast and some of that salad from yesterday in the fridge. Should be plenty for you tonight." Jessica touched his arm. "We should head out, babe. Traffic on the highway is going to be rough." I watched them gather their things, Richard in the navy suit I had picked up from the dry cleaner 2 days earlier, Jessica in a sleek black dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. They laughed about something work-related as they stepped toward the garage. Richard paused just long enough to brush a quick kiss against my cheek. "Don't wait up," he said. The door clicked shut behind them. The silence that followed felt heavier than usual. I stood motionless in the kitchen for several minutes, listening to the garage door rumble closed and the car pull away. Through the window, their taillights disappeared down the tree-lined street. I opened the refrigerator. There sat the plastic container of pot roast with my name written neatly on top in Jessica's handwriting. The small, deliberate label felt like a final punctuation mark on 6 years of gradual erasure. I closed the door without taking it out. That was the moment everything crystallized. I wasn't angry in the explosive way I might have been years ago. Instead, a cold, clear calm settled over me, the kind that comes when you finally stop lying to yourself. I walked upstairs to our bedroom, pulled 2 suitcases from the closet, and began packing with deliberate care. Clothes, important documents, the few pieces of jewelry my mother had left me, and the small photo album I kept hidden in my nightstand drawer. I took only what was truly mine. Downstairs at the kitchen table, the same oak table where we had celebrated birthdays, helped with homework, and once planned our retirement, I sat down and wrote the letter I had been composing in my mind for months. My hand was steady. The words came clearly. By the time Richard and the others returned from their celebration, I would already be gone. The house that had once been our shared dream now belonged to someone else. Tomorrow morning, new beginnings would start for all of us. I sealed the envelope, placed it under the cookie jar Richard had given me for our 15th anniversary, and took one last look around the kitchen. Then I picked up my suitcases, turned off the lights, and walked out the front door without looking back. I wasn't always the woman who answered okay and disappeared into the night. 27 years ago, I married Richard Thompson in a modest ceremony surrounded by family and friends who believed we had what it took to last. I was 25 then, a passionate high school English teacher who loved diving into literature with my students and dreaming about the novel I might one day write. Richard was an up-and-coming sales representative with sharp ambition and an easy laugh that made me feel seen. We bought our first home together, a 4-bedroom colonial in a quiet Ohio suburb, and filled it with hope. For the first 2 decades, our marriage felt solid. We had Michael and then Emily. I scaled back to part-time teaching when the children were young so I could be there for school plays, doctor visits, and late-night talks about their dreams. Richard climbed the corporate ladder and I supported every rung. I packed his bags for business trips, hosted client dinners at our home, and managed the household so he could focus on building the life we both wanted. In the evenings, we would sit on the back porch with a glass of wine and talk about our future, the trips we would take after the kids grew up, the retirement we would enjoy together. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. We laughed easily. We argued sometimes, but we always found our way back. I believed that was what marriage meant, showing up even when it wasn't glamorous. Everything began to shift 6 years ago when Michael brought Jessica home. At first, I welcomed her warmly. She was bright, articulate, and seemed genuinely interested in our family. When she and Michael announced they were engaged after only 8 months, Richard and I helped pay for part of the wedding. Then came the suggestion that the newlyweds move in with us just for a year or two to save money for a down payment on their own house. The empty nest had felt lonely after Emily moved out for college, so I agreed without hesitation. I thought it would bring energy back into the home. Instead, it slowly dismantled my place in it. At first, the changes were subtle. Jessica offered to help reorganize the kitchen, which really meant moving everything to suit her preferences. She created a shared Google Calendar for household tasks, and politely suggested I handle most of the cooking, because as she put it with a sweet smile, "You're so much better at it than I am, Linda." Richard started coming home and asking what was for dinner before even saying hello. When I tried to share something from my day, the conversation would drift back to his work stress or Jessica's latest interior design idea. Michael and Emily began treating me like a convenient resource rather than their mother. "Mom, can you watch the baby this weekend? Jessica and I need a break." "Mom, we're having friends over. Could you make your famous lasagna?" The requests came with less gratitude and more expectation. Richard rarely intervened. If I expressed frustration, he would sigh and say, "They're young, Linda. We were busy once too. Just help them out." I told myself it was temporary. I convinced myself that being needed was the same as being valued. I stopped teaching altogether when Jessica suggested it would be easier for everyone if I managed the house full-time. "You deserve to relax," she had said. But what she really meant was that my time now belonged to the family schedule she controlled. Gradually, I became invisible in plain sight. Conversations at the dinner table flowed around me. Plans for vacations and holidays were made without my input. When I tried to join discussions about finances or future decisions, Jessica would gently steer the topic elsewhere while Richard nodded along. The house I had poured my heart into for decades now carried Jessica's taste in furniture, her choice of paint colors, and her rules about how things should be done. I kept waiting for Richard to notice. I hoped the man I married would eventually see what was happening and stand beside me. But the higher he rose at work, the more distant he became. He grew accustomed to the smoothly run household, the hot meals, the quiet support, and the absence of conflict. My role had become that of a background character in the story of his success. That Thursday night, as I drove away from the only home I had known for nearly 3 decades, I didn't feel rage or even overwhelming sadness. I felt clarity. 6 years of small dismissals of being sidelined in my own life had led to this moment. I had given everything to a family that had stopped seeing me as a partner and started seeing me as staff. Now it was time to see myself again. The changes didn't happen overnight. They arrived quietly like water wearing down stone until one day I barely recognized the shape of my own life. It started with small adjustments. Jessica would rearrange the pantry for better flow while I was out running errands. She replaced the curtains in the living room with heavier drapes she preferred, explaining that they gave the house a more modern feel. When I mentioned I liked the old ones because they reminded me of the ones my mother had made, she smiled and said, "We all have to move forward, Linda." Richard, scrolling through his phone at the time, simply nodded. Cooking became my primary domain. Jessica claimed she was still learning and praised my meals in front of Richard, which made him beam with pride. Before long, the praise faded into expectation. "Linda, we're having the Johnsons over Saturday. Your pot roast would be perfect." Or on weeknights, "Richard worked late again, maybe you could throw something together. I cooked, I cleaned, I shopped." The household ran smoothly and everyone grew comfortable with the arrangement. The kids followed their father's lead. Michael, now a rising executive like his dad, would text me during the week, "Mom, can you pick up Liam from daycare? Thursday, Jessica has a spin class." Emily, working in marketing, often dropped by on weekends with laundry or requests for help planning parties. "You're the best mom," they'd say while I folded their clothes or watched their son. But the invitations to join them rarely came. It's more of a young crowd thing. Jessica would explain lightly when they headed out to dinner or concerts. Richard changed too. The man who once brought me flowers after tough weeks at work now came home talking mostly about office politics and his latest deal. When I tried to share a book I was reading or a quiet frustration about feeling sidelined, he would pat my hand and say, "You've got it so good here, Linda. No deadlines, no boss breathing down your neck." He genuinely seemed to believe it. In his mind, I had the easy role. Holidays revealed the deepening cracks. The first Thanksgiving after they moved in, Jessica took charge of the menu and seating. I was assigned the side dishes and cleanup. When I suggested hosting my sister from Michigan, Jessica gently countered that the house was already full with her parents coming. Richard agreed it made more sense. I spent that evening in the kitchen while laughter spilled from the dining room. No one seemed to notice when I slipped away early. Birthdays followed the same pattern. For my 50th, they ordered takeout and sang a quick happy birthday before Michael and Jessica announced their second pregnancy. The conversation shifted immediately to baby plans. Richard gave me a gift card to a spa. "You deserve it, but never made time to go with me." Our wedding anniversary that year passed with only a text from him during a layover 27 years. "Wow. Love you." The financial erosion was subtler, but just as painful. When Michael's startup idea needed seed money, Richard co-signed a loan without discussing it with me first. When Jessica wanted to redecorate the master bathroom, the bill somehow came from our joint account, the one I had contributed to for decades with my teaching pension and inheritance from my parents. "It's for the family home," Richard would say whenever I raised concerns. The house was still in both our names, but it no longer felt like mine. Even quiet moments hurt. I would sit on the back porch with my coffee in the morning, the same spot where Richard and I once planned our future, only to hear Jessica upstairs directing Michael on how to handle the situation with your mom. She never raised her voice, but the tone carried clearly through the open windows, patient, reasonable, and dismissive. "She means well, but she doesn't understand how things work now." I tried speaking up a few times. One evening after dinner, I told Richard I felt invisible. He listened, or at least pretended to, then said, "Jessica looks up to you. She's just trying to fit in and run a modern household. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." His words carried a quiet warning. Rocking the boat would only cause tension for everyone. So I stopped rocking. I smiled, I cooked, I helped with the grandchildren. I became exceptionally good at pretending everything was fine. Inside, though, a steady resentment built, not explosive anger, but a deep, weary exhaustion at being taken for granted in the very home I had helped create and sustain. That Thursday night, standing alone in the kitchen with the container of leftovers labeled like a tenant's meal, I finally understood the full picture. 6 years of being slowly edited out of my own story had reached its natural conclusion. They no longer saw me as a wife, mother, or partner. I had become background furniture, useful, quiet, and expected to stay in place. But furniture can choose to walk away. That night, while Richard and the rest of the family raised glasses at the Capitol Grill, I sat at the kitchen table with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The leftover pot roast remained untouched in the refrigerator. For the first time, I refused to play my assigned role. Instead, I opened my laptop and reviewed the documents I had quietly gathered over the past 7 months. It had started in March after another dismissive conversation where Jessica suggested I should contribute more meaningfully by handling all the grocery shopping, meal planning, and deep cleaning, while she focused on her career development. That same week, I made an appointment with a family law attorney named Margaret Klein in the next county. I told Richard I was going for a routine checkup. He barely looked up from his phone. Margaret had listened carefully as I described the slow erosion of my marriage and my place in our home. When I finished, she didn't offer pity. She offered options. The house is jointly owned, she explained, but you have significant separate assets. Your inheritance from your parents is still intact. Your retirement accounts are in your name. You have leverage, Linda. Those words unlocked something in me. I wasn't trapped. I had choices. Over the following months, I met with Margaret several more times while telling the family I was volunteering at the local library or visiting an old teaching colleague. I had the house appraised discreetly. I interviewed a real estate agent who worked across the river in a different market. I even flew to North Carolina for one weekend under the pretense of attending a garden show, there in the gentle hills outside Asheville. I found a charming 2-bedroom cottage with a screened porch overlooking the mountains. It was modest compared to our colonial, but it felt like breathing room. I put in an offer the same day. Richard never suspected a thing. He was too busy chasing the promotion that had finally come through. By early October, the pieces were in place. The house was listed and had received strong offers within weeks. Closing was scheduled for the following Monday. I had already transferred funds, arranged movers for my personal belongings, and secured the new home. All that remained was the final step. I wrote the letter carefully, choosing every word with the same precision I once used to grade student essays. I didn't rant or accuse. I simply laid out the truth. Richard, by the time you read this, I will be gone. The house has been sold. Closing was finalized yesterday, and the new owners take possession tomorrow at noon. Your things need to be removed by then. I have arranged for a storage unit if needed, the key and address are in the envelope. For 27 years, I supported your dreams, raised our children, and kept this home running. In the last 6 years, I have been treated as little more than unpaid staff in the house we built together. I have paid the mortgage, maintained the property, and quietly accepted being excluded from family decisions, vacations, and now your biggest professional milestone. I no longer accept that role. I am moving to a new home in Asheville where I intend to live with dignity and peace. The apartment above the garage that we purchased years ago as an investment is now available. The rent is market rate. Michael and Jessica can move there if they choose. I wish you success in your new position. I hope one day you understand what was lost. Linda. I sealed the envelope and placed it under the cookie jar. Then I walked through each room one last time. I touched the banister where the children had slid down as kids looked at the backyard where we once planted a garden together, and paused in the bedroom that no longer felt like ours. I took only what belonged to me, my clothes, books, photographs, and a few pieces of furniture I had inherited from my parents. Everything else. The things Jessica had chosen and Richard had paid for with our joint money I left behind. At 2 in the morning, I loaded the last suitcase into my SUV, backed out of the driveway, and drove away. The neighborhood was dark and quiet. In the rearview mirror, the house lights faded as I turned the corner. I didn't cry. I felt remarkably steady, as if I had finally aligned my life with a truth I had avoided for too long. I drove through the night, stopping only for coffee and gas. As the miles passed, the weight I had carried for 6 years began to lift. By the time the sun rose over the mountains of western North Carolina, I knew I had done the only thing left that made sense. I had chosen myself. I left just after 2:30 in the morning. The suitcases were already packed in the back of my SUV, the letter sealed and waiting on the kitchen table. I took one final walk through the house, turning off lights as I went. In the living room, I paused by the fireplace mantel, touching the silver frame that held our wedding photo. Richard looked so young and hopeful then. I left it where it was. Some memories didn't need to travel with me. The engine started quietly in the garage. I backed out slowly, the tires crunching softly over the gravel at the end of the driveway. No dramatic music, no tears streaming down my face, just the low hum of the car and the steady beat of my own resolve. I had driven this street thousands of times, taking kids to school, picking up groceries, bringing Richard home from the airport. Tonight it felt like the first time I was truly seeing it. I merged onto the highway heading south, the city lights of Columbus fading behind me. The drive was long, nearly 8 hours, but I welcomed the solitude. I listened to a calm audiobook about mountain gardening, stopped once for gas and strong coffee near Cincinnati, and kept moving. With every mile, the tightness in my shoulders eased. I wasn't running away. I was moving toward something that finally belonged only to me. Dawn broke as I crossed into North Carolina. The Blue Ridge Mountains rose in the distance, soft and misty in the early light. By the time I pulled into the driveway of the small cottage on the edge of Asheville, the sun had fully risen. The house was even better than the photos: white siding, deep porch, and a view of rolling hills through the kitchen window. Mrs. Evelyn Harper, the retired neighbor who had agreed to keep an eye on the place, was already waiting with a thermos of coffee and a plate of warm cinnamon rolls. "You must be Linda," she said with a genuine smile. "Welcome home." Those 2 words, welcome home, hit me harder than I expected. I thanked her, my voice steadier than I felt. For the first time in years, someone was happy to see me without wanting anything in return. Inside, I unpacked slowly. I made the bed with fresh linens, arranged my books on the living room shelf, and placed a small photo of my mother on the windowsill. Then I sat at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee and finally turned on my phone. It had been off since I left Ohio. The screen flooded with notifications: 23 missed calls, 12 voicemails, most from Richard, a few from Michael and Jessica. I pressed play on the first one, bracing myself. "Linda, what the hell is going on?" Richard's voice was sharp with confusion. "We came home and there are people here saying they bought the house. Call me back right now." The second was angrier. "This isn't funny. The realtor is here with paperwork. Where are you? The kids are freaking out." By the 5th message, his tone had shifted. I read the letter. "Linda, I don't understand. We can fix this. Just tell me where you are. Please." Jessica's voice came next, shrill and furious. "You selfish woman! How could you do this to your own family? After everything we've done for you, Michael is devastated. Call us immediately." I listened to them all without pausing, then deleted every single one. I didn't feel triumph or cruelty. I felt exhausted relief. For 6 years I had absorbed their needs, their dismissals, their casual cruelty wrapped in politeness. Now the silence was mine to keep. I sent one single text to Richard before blocking his number. "I am safe. The house is no longer mine or yours to share. The apartment above the garage is available at market rent. Make your own arrangements. I need time and space. Do not try to find me." Then I turned the phone off again and stepped onto the porch. The morning air was cool and carried the scent of pine and damp earth. Birds called from the trees. Somewhere down the street a neighbor laughed with a child. Life was continuing quiet, ordinary, and finally mine to shape. I had executed my silent exit perfectly. No screaming matches, no dramatic confrontations. Just the quiet consequence of years of being taken for granted. They had celebrated without me. Now I was beginning again without them. The first 3 weeks in Asheville passed like a long, slow exhale. I woke each morning to the sound of birds and the smell of coffee brewing in my own kitchen. I joined a gentle hiking group that met twice a week, bought fresh produce at the local farmers market, and started volunteering at the community center 3 mornings a week, helping older adults with basic computer skills and resume writing. Small things brought unexpected joy, choosing my own paint color for the bedroom wall, reading a novel without interruption, and sitting on the porch with a glass of wine as the sun dipped behind the mountains. My body, which had carried years of tension, began to relax. I slept deeply for the first time in years. But the past refused to stay quiet. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, while I was sorting books on the porch, a familiar silver SUV pulled up. Jessica stepped out, her designer coat looking out of place against the simple mountain homes. She spotted me immediately and forced a concerned smile as she approached. "Linda," she called, voice pitched with practiced worry. "Thank God we found you. We've all been so sick with worry." I remained seated, coffee cup warm in my hands. How did you find me, Jessica? She hesitated only a moment. Michael hired someone. We had to make sure you were safe. She climbed the porch steps without being invited. This little house. Really. After everything we built together as a family, I studied her carefully. The same woman who had once reorganized my kitchen now stood here looking slightly frayed at the edges. It's mine, I said simply. And it's enough. She launched into her prepared speech. Richard is devastated. He lost focus at work and almost jeopardized the new position. Michael and Emily are barely speaking to each other because of the stress. We had to move into that tiny apartment above the garage. It's humiliating. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I set my cup down. I'm sorry you're struggling, but those are your consequences, not my emergency. Her mask slipped. You abandoned your family. After we gave you purpose for years, who are you without us? The question didn't sting the way it once would have. I stood up slowly. I'm Linda Thompson, a woman who finally remembered who she was before she disappeared into everyone else's needs. You should leave now. She tried once more, voice rising. Richard is coming tomorrow. He wants to talk. We can fix this. We're still married. Then he can speak to my attorney, I replied calmly. Our marriage ended long before I left Ohio. Goodbye, Jessica. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked back to her car. I watched her drive away before sitting back down. My hands were steady. For the first time, I truly believed my own words. Richard arrived 4 days later. He looked thinner, older, the confident regional director replaced by a tired man in wrinkled clothes. I met him on the porch again, this time with 2 cups of coffee already prepared. One for me, one for him if he chose to stay. He accepted the cup but couldn't meet my eyes at first. I read the letter 100 times, he said quietly. I keep thinking if I had just... You didn't, I finished for him. My voice was gentle but firm. For 6 years you watched me fade away and told yourself it was normal. You let Jessica run our home and our family while I became the help. He winced. I was focused on work. I thought you were happy keeping things running. I was wrong. I'm so sorry, Linda. I believed he meant it in that moment. But meaning it wasn't enough. I appreciate the apology, I said. But I'm not coming back. This life I'm building here, it's mine. I won't trade it for the version of myself I had to become in Ohio. We sat in silence for a while. He told me about the chaos after I left, about Michael and Jessica fighting constantly, about Emily siding with me once she heard the full story. I listened without offering solutions. When he finally asked if there was any chance for us, I shook my head. Not the way things were. Maybe one day we can have a different relationship, but not now. I need this time for myself. Richard left that evening looking smaller than when he arrived. I watched his car disappear down the mountain road and felt a quiet sadness, not for what I had lost, but for what we both had wasted. Then I went inside, made myself dinner, and read by the fireplace until I fell asleep. The confrontations were over. The healing had truly begun. 1 year later, I stood on my porch watching the October sunlight paint the Blue Ridge Mountains in shades of amber and crimson. The air carried the crisp scent of falling leaves and wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. At 53, I felt more alive than I had in the final decade of my old life. My days had a gentle rhythm now, morning coffee on the porch, volunteering at the community center, afternoon hikes with friends who knew me only as Linda, the woman who loved books, gardening, and quiet conversations. I had lost 20 pounds without trying, mostly from walking the trails and cooking meals I actually enjoyed. My blood pressure had improved so much that my new doctor in Asheville reduced my medication. The deep lines of exhaustion that once marked my face had softened. I smiled more easily. I laughed without looking over my shoulder to see if it was appropriate. Mrs. Evelyn Harper walked over with 2 mugs of her famous apple cider, settling into the rocking chair I had bought specifically for visitors. You got mail from Ohio today, she said, handing me an envelope. Looks like it's from Richard. I took it without the familiar knot in my stomach. Inside was a short letter and a photo. Richard and Emily had sent it. Michael and Jessica had divorced 6 months earlier. Jessica had moved back to Columbus to be closer to her parents. Richard wrote that he had stepped down from the regional director role not because he had to, but because he finally realized the cost of chasing success at the expense of everything else. He was working fewer hours now and seeing a therapist. He apologized again, not asking me to come back, but simply hoping one day I might let him visit as a friend. I folded the letter and placed it inside with the others. I had replied to a few of his messages over the past year, brief, polite responses that maintained clear boundaries. We were no longer married in any meaningful way. The divorce had been finalized quietly 3 months ago. I felt no bitterness, only a calm acceptance that some chapters end so better ones can begin. Michael had reached out too, struggling in the aftermath. He and Emily had both begun to see how much they had taken me for granted. I spoke with them occasionally on the phone, but I kept the conversations light and limited. I was their mother, not their safety net. They were learning to stand on their own, and I was finally free to do the same. My life here was rich in ways I never imagined possible. The hiking group had become close friends. We planned weekend trips to the Smokies and shared potlucks on Friday evenings. At the community center, I taught a weekly writing class for women over 50 who wanted to tell their own stories. Many of them were navigating similar transitions, divorces, empty nests, rediscovering themselves. We supported one another without keeping score. On my birthday last month, a small group gathered on this very porch. We ate cake, watched the sunset, and told stories. No one expected me to serve them. No one made me feel invisible. For the first time in years, I was surrounded by people who wanted my company simply because it was mine. As the afternoon light softened, I thought about the woman who had once stood in that Ohio kitchen holding a container of leftovers. She had been tired and visible, and afraid that choosing herself meant losing everything. She had been wrong. Choosing myself had given me back my life. I still loved Richard in the distant way you love someone you shared decades with. I still cared about my children. But I had learned the difference between love and self-abandonment. I had learned that peace is not selfish, it is necessary. And I had learned that it is never too late to become the woman I was always meant to be. If you're listening to this story right now and finding pieces of your own life reflected in mine, I want you to know this. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Your worth is not measured by how much you sacrifice or how quietly you endure being taken for granted. You deserve respect, dignity, and a life that feels like your own. I want to know how this story touched you. Have you ever faced a similar situation in your marriage or family? What would you have done differently? Leave a comment below and tell me the city or state you're watching from. I read every single one, and it means more than you know. If this resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. We have many more honest stories like this coming, stories about reclaiming your life, setting boundaries, and finding peace after pain. Thank you for spending this time with me. Wherever you are on your journey, I hope you find the courage to choose yourself too.